So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and it may be a new year, but we are still in the depths of winter, so welcome to the Cold Fells, which is obviously going to be an evil-themed map, considering it's sort of in the Angmar-Rudauer region. And yeah, this is one of the new maps that I have actually played on once before, albeit it wasn't too successful a battle. But yeah, it's obviously one of the new maps that was added into 0.97 that I don't think I've shown yet actually. So it should be interesting. There's definitely a lot going on in this map. It's very big, there's a lot of features on it as well. So let's see. It is also going to be a good versus evil one, I believe, and technically speaking, evil will be sort of on the more defensive side of things, I believe. Purely because, you know, they obviously start off on this section of the map with all of the large Dol-Guldur-esque structures on it. Yeah, and obviously they also have the higher ground as well. Although it being a 4v4 means I would imagine they're probably going to come forward a little bit and not just camp at the back where all of the really nasty choke points are. Obviously that would be a little bit unfair, but I don't think that's what's going to be happening anyway. So I think it's going to be a pair of Rudauer and Angmar armies over on this side of things, with the forces of good deployed over here in their encampments, and they will then proceed to advance through the various Orc ruins. So we'll go through the red team first of all, seeing as we're over here and they are technically the attackers. I'll try to go through the army compositions a little bit more quickly as well, because this is a relatively long battle anyway. And also I have noticed in recent videos I have been sort of slipping back into my old habits a little bit of making the army composition phase a little bit too long, even though there is always the option of skipping the phase in the description below. It's, you know, pays to be a little bit more concise, I think. So we have Viper Action, who's going to be playing as Lothlorien, obviously probably the strongest archer faction in the game at the moment, certainly in terms of the damage they can dish out with the various types of projectiles they have. They're a very scary faction when they're at range, which should be very useful as they push through the Cold Fells here, and they start off here with some March Warns of the Wood, so some poison arrows there. We have some Lorinand archers, which are actually the only Lothlorien archer I think to not get a special projectile, but they are still heavy elven archers, so they have very good base damage in comparison to most other heavy archers, and of course they're fantastic in melee as well in comparison. Speaking of which, Watchers of the Goldenwood obviously really strong in melee, in addition to the Silverthorn arrows they have, which will knock units over that they hit, even if they don't kill them. So we have some Elder Council as well, so some Spear Javelin hybrids, and on a map like this, while it is more or less a siege, I would say, actually, considering the terrain that the attackers have to move through, you know, there will still be cavalry, I would imagine, and so the Elder Council are fantastic at that because they can use their javelins and their spears to zone cavalry out. Karas Galadhon's Guardians as well are a really good unit to have in this sort of situation. Obviously, if they can avoid arrow fire, they may be multiple HP, but arrows are still going to be a bit of a problem for them. But in melee, of course, they can be an insurmountable obstacle if the opponent has no answer to them. Lorinand Axemen are a fantastic unit of line infantry as well. They trade in a little bit of survivability in favour of damage in comparison to other elven units of this type, but that only makes them stronger against lower tier factions, I would suggest, well, factions that rely a little bit more on lower tier units like Rudauer and Angmar anyway, certainly Rudauer. Riders of the Goldenwood as well, probably the strongest horse archers in the game as well, certainly at range with their Silverthorn arrows. I think they might actually be slightly less tanky than the Chieftain's Vanguard or the Storm Guard of Khand, I think they're called now, from Khand, but even so, that's a relatively minor sort of loss in comparison to the damage they can deal. Lorinand Mounted Company are fantastic lancers, and some Lorinand spears are in there as well. Could be a few hidden units as well, knowing Lothlorien. We have Inarius, who's playing as Imladris, so a little bit more focused on the armour and survivability things in comparison to Lothlorien, who are a little bit more about their damage and their archers. So we have the Riders of the Bruinen, who are of course really good horse archers. I think they are actually spear cav in melee as well, so very multifaceted indeed. The Gwythi Rockdor, which are probably the best unit of all-round knights in the game when you take things as a whole. Like the Knights of Annúminas are tankier, the Horse Lords of Ulmo, I should say, the Linden Knights are, I think, faster and just more damaging in general, but the best mix, I think, comes from the Gwythi Rockdor. Eldarenway Spearmen, really strong heavy elven spears. The heavier units for Imladris tend to be just that little bit better than the other elven factions, but of course they are very expensive. Imladris Guardians as well with the armour upgrade. We have some Eldarenway archers there, obviously the heaviest archers that Imladris can bring outside of the General's bodyguards. More Imladris Guardians with the Imladris Sentries, the silvered armour of Imladris here in full effect. The golden armour of the Eldarenway here also, with some spears, some sword masters, some Bruinen River Wards as well. And then obviously the very tanky Gwythi Arthand as well, the very high tier Imladris Spearmen, and then some more cavalry down here in the shape of the Eldarenway Lancers, really strong Lancers. So strong that they can actually sort of go toe-to-toe with other cav in melee, in spite of the fact that's usually a Lancer's weakness. Then up here we have Arthedain, played by Windy Pops. This is actually the second battle in a row that I've done that has had him featuring. I hope that he's not doing this one as well. Obviously it can be a little bit awkward to sort of try and step on eggshells, but Dunedain Peacekeepers, I really rate the Dunedain Peacekeepers as a unit, really strong unit of line infantry. They also have axes, so much in the same way as the Lorenan Axemen, they trade in a little bit of survivability for damage, but because they are Dunedain, against most units that doesn't actually matter too much. It's only when they come up against other higher tier units or units of a similar cost to themselves that actually can become an issue, but for the most part they're really, really good, especially against factions like Rudour. Arthedain Men-at-Arms with both levels of armour upgrades as well, which should help them stay alive for longer against some of the scarier units, particularly that Angmar have available. Rudour's AP might be a bit of an issue there. We have some dismounted Fornoster Rain Knights as well, a really strong unit of human Swordmasters. They may not be quite as strong as stuff like the Elder Renway Swordmasters, but they can still hold their own, especially when it comes to facing off against Orcs and Evil Men. Dismounted Knights of Numinous, a Numinous Gate Guard, some Fornoster Rain Defenders as well. So going for there's a lot of sort of Arthedain spine here made up of their upgraded men-at-arms, the Fornoster Rain Defenders as well, and then it's augmented by a few units of infantry quality like the Dismounted Knights of Numinous and the Numinous Gate Guards. I'm not seeing an awful lot of archers, to be honest with you, from Arthedain, which is an interesting choice, I would have to say. There is some Wardens of the North just over here and some Arthedain Marksmen, but for the most part it looks like he has gone for more infantry, which is, I think, a good choice, considering he's fighting alongside two Elven factions, one of which being Lothlorien. And also the other Arthedain army may have brought more in the way of archers. We see here Dark Elven King. His Arthedain men-at-arms do not have the armour upgrade, so they'll be a little bit worse, particularly against Angmar. This unit does have the first level of armour upgrade. Another unit there that is without it. Fornoster Rain Defenders. Looks as though he's gone for a few units of militia as well. Evendim Archers, which should be good at skirmishing with the low tier archers that Angmar and Rudour often brings to the field. Arthedain Marksmen should have the armour even without the armour upgrades, to be honest with you. Their heavy mail should still be enough to give them victory against most archers that especially Angmar have available, but even Rudour as well don't have the best archer lineup, if we're being honest. Fornoster Rain Knights as well, so obviously Arthedain are certainly not lacking when it comes to their own cavalry either. And we also have here the Mounted Knights of Numinas and the Royal Courthouse Armlay, so going heavy into the cavalry here, which combined with Imladris' cavalry on the field today, and Lothlorien's actually, should be quite a scary thing to behold. Dismounted Knights of Numinas back here, as well as some Fornoster Rain Knights, and then there's a few other units sequestered away in the trees as well in the shape of the Dunedain Peacekeepers. Now we shall move on to the de facto defenders here in the battle today. Eclipse 2500, who sent me the battle replay, so big thank you to him once again. He's going to be playing as one of the two Angmar armies. Angmar are very, very strong at what they do, but they are rather one-dimensional in the way that they're set up. They're obviously very strong when it comes to being on the front foot and trying to be aggressive, but obviously in this situation that may be not what you want to do, and then Angmar can start to come unstuck a little bit. We'll see how they decide to approach this. The Witch Realm Inquisitors, to be fair though, as melee knights, should be able to defeat one-on-one any cavalry unit that they're opposing today, but of course the red team here have gone for a lot of cavalry, so it remains to be seen how well that works out. Some Snaga Stalkers, a unit that's free, so you may as well bring them. They will of course lose to pretty much everything that the attackers today have brought, but they will at least get in the way and act as a screen for some stronger units. Guardians of Khan Doom are a very strong and dependable unit of line infantry, but they will be outperformed by quite a lot of the units that are on display against them today, particularly the Elven ones. But even Arthedain have got several units that should be able to defeat them, including the Dunedain Peacekeepers and dismounted Fornost Rain Knights. The Angmar Halberds should be a very useful unit in spite of how cheap they are. Their AP and their phalanx should be quite good, to be honest with you, especially against Arthedain, but even against Imladris, as long as they're backed up properly and are not going up against the Imladris pikemen. Witch Realm pikemen as well, obviously heavily armoured, very, very nice. You can see back here some more Angmar Halberdiers, some Guardians of Khan Doom. Just looking at this army, actually, it's possible that the blue team will be on the defence, because I can't help but feel as though this army might be a little bit lower in terms of the quality. There's a lot of Angmar Halberds, Witch Realm pikemen, Guardians of Khan Doom, some Trolls, some Witches back there, everyone's favourite of course, but they may need the Witches here honestly, because this is not a situation where Angmar typically do well, where they're sort of backed into a corner and have to be a little bit more passive, especially when you consider the skirmish lines they're going up against. Blackwatch Legion, and back there we have some Witch Realm Blackguard. Then we get into one of the Rudour armies, played by Tundra's Fox. Rudour swordsmen, obviously in terms of line infantry, they're not going to be as strong or as durable as the Guardians of Khan Doom they're fighting alongside, but they are cheaper and they are very numerous as well. So the evil men should be able to do that role pretty well. Granadyne Pikemen are a unit I really rate as well. They always tend to get quite a high kill count as well for pikemen, in addition to their shields, which sets them apart. Witch Realm Enslavers, that AP is going to be incredibly useful against Arthedain, and like I said, also somewhat useful against Imladris as well, to be honest with you. Franadine Berserkers, also quite similar. They're not as deadly in melee as the Witch Realm Enslavers, but they're still pretty damn strong and do offer some AP as well. Rudar Marksmen up here on these hills. We have a lot of cavalry here from Rudar as well. Coldfell Maidens are really, really good at sort of counteracting enemy cavalry because they can throw their javelins, and then in melee they do have a slight anti-cavalry bonus as well. I believe they counter spear cav. Having said that, they will still be outperformed by quite a lot of the other cavalry on the other team, so they're going to need the support of Dunman Scouts over here in terms of numbers and stuff like the Witch Realm Inquisitors as well, so they're going to need to be careful here. They can make it work, but if they get caught in melee then they could end up getting squashed by the heavy Elven and Dunedain cavalry they're facing off against. Rudar Swordsmen, Essenmoor's Troll Hunters here on the front with their javelins. Dunman Spearmen obviously low quality, but they're going to be getting in the way of the advance. Essenmoor's Troll Hunters, of course, with Rudauer, it's always going to come down. If you're going up against Imladris or other Elven factions, or even Arthedain, to be honest with you, as Rudauer, it's always really going to come down to if you can use your javelins and axe throws effectively, I think, because the infantry quality just isn't there. The AP is, but even your AP units do tend to be a little bit lower on the old melee defense, which the elves obviously can ruthlessly exploit. Y2K86 is another Rudauer player. He's got some Rudauer swordsmen with some Dunman pikemen mixed in, so some cheap pikes, but you know, that could be good. If you can blanket the line with them, it makes it difficult to push through them quickly, and then that offers your ranged units the time they need to do some damage. The Rudauer marksmen have got plenty of ammunition with which to do that. We have more Coldfell Maidens as well, so obviously with Rudauer you expect a lot of javelins, and they certainly haven't disappointed with regards to that. And there's a few other units back there as well, which Realm Enslavers, more Franadine pikemen, obviously quite spread out in these trees in the heart of this Coldfells settlement. And finally Mr. Sneakman playing as another Angmar army. We have some Halberdiers, we have some Orc Fellas over here as well, which again AP. Over on this side of the battlefield though, Lothlorien probably is the faction where AP will be least useful. It still will be kind of useful, they do have decent armour, but combined with their really high melee defense, honestly units like this don't tend to pay off quite so much as they do against factions like Arthedain. Gundabad Guard with their sort of stolen dwarven shields and helms, they're obviously going to be here trying to keep the rabble in line, as well as the Witch Realm Blackguard of course. Guardians of Kharn Dûm with the armour upgrade, trying to make them just that little bit more resilient against those Lothlorien arrows, which of course is going to be an important factor in this battle. Witch Realm Pikemen, more pikemen, some Guardians of Kharn Dûm, more Orc Fellas, so definitely going heavy in for these axemen, and I think they have their armour upgrade as well. Interestingly enough, some of them have got their hoods on. Not that that's much of an armour upgrade, of course. Guardians of Kharn Dûm, and then back here we have a cluster of trolls once again. Gundabad trolls and Angmar trolls, and maybe a few other units, of course, hidden around all over the place on both sides because there's quite a lot of tree cover. But I will make a little bit of a cut here because obviously it's going to take quite a while for both factions to advance into a position where they're starting to engage with one another. So I'll make a cut here and I will rejoin when the battle is joined. So it looks as though we're actually going to get underway fairly quickly here as the cavalry is going to start skirmishing with one another. You can see Arthedain here is sort of moving around this high ground, this sort of hill fort down here. But you can also see that Tundra's Fox is moving forward very aggressively with a unit of Dunman Scouts here, and I think he has seen that he can catch out a unit of Arthedain men-at-arms with a quick charge. But the Dunedain Mounted Company are here, and to be honest with you, just sort of losing stomach for that quite quickly as the Arthedain marksmen start to open up. The Dunman Scouts need to sort of make a decision here. I think they're getting a little bit indecisive, and that's not really what they want. The longer that they stay in range of those archers, the worse it's going to be for them. They don't have much armour, their shields are not brilliant, even though they do have them. They really need to get out of here before the Dunedain Mounted Company close them down. The Eldraenway Lancers are also on their way over. There are some Franadine Nobles in the background as well, the Rudauer Knights, which are not to be taken lightly. They're a little bit lower in terms of their defensive values in comparison to some other cavalry, but their AP can be very useful, especially against quite a lot of the cavalry they're facing off against here. The Eldraenway Lancers, while their quality does see them through against other cavalry quite a lot, that will not be true against Knights. Least of all Knights that have some AP to them as well. If we have a look over here, there's also some Coldfell Maidens moving forwards over here. There's quite a lot of wargs as well. Mr. Sneakman does have quite a significant cavalry force himself. A couple of units of warg skirmishers and some Witch Realm Inquisitors. So again, I do feel as though the blue team actually do have the tools that they need to counteract the red team's cavalry. They definitely have a lot of javelin cavalry. The cavalry that they have going into melee is a good mix of sort of fodder in the shape of the Dunman Scouts and really high quality stuff like the Witch Realm Inquisitors and Franadine Nobles over here, which is... It probably won't win the cavalry engagement against the red team, considering all of the elven and human knights that have been brought, as well as all of the quality, but it will make things quite difficult for the red team to really establish themselves with their cavalry. And with all the money that they've dumped into their cavalry, to be honest with you, the red team need their cavalry to do some significant work. Because if it comes down to it and they aren't really able to get cost effectiveness with it, then the red team, the blue team rather, can afford to just dig in. And it might be quite difficult to dislodge them, especially with all the Rudauer javelins and units like the Witchers sequestered away. Obviously you always have to be on the lookout for units like that. What have we over here? More cavalry units being mobilised across the field. Imladris' units, the Gwaith'i Rokdor and the Riders of the Broinen. And that is something, obviously, the Grey Company and the Dunedain Scouts are here as well, so there's a lot of horse archers on display, to be honest with you, from the attackers as well, which is, you might think is a kind of strange choice, but I think it will actually work out here, because it will make the life of stuff like the Coldfell Maidens just a little bit more difficult, and that's one of the best tools that the blue team have to make life a little bit more awkward for the red team on the advance. It seems like that was a bit of a false dawn, really, that initial charge from Tundra's Fox over here, because it does look as though they've sort of settled into being a little bit more passive once again, both sides. The Witchram Inquisitors are moving forward. Fornoster Rain Knights are over here. Now this is an interesting gambit, this, from Dark Elven King, because he is charging in, lances down from the Fornoster Rain Knights, but this is not a fight that they have any hope at all of winning. The Witchram Inquisitors will absolutely tear their way through these heavily armoured mounted lancers of Arthedain. I think maybe they're hoping to draw them in and then get the Dunedain Scouts and the Grey Company to maybe do some of the work for them. But to be honest with you, the Witchram Inquisitors are so tanky with their heavy armour, their big shields, and their multiple HP that you can see here they're just pushing backwards, and the Fornoster Rain Knights are going to try and charge in once again. The Witchram Inquisitors, they are taking some losses, but ultimately this is going to be very light work for them in melee. And they don't have the best shot either, the Arthedain Horse Archers, when you consider the fact that they're having to shoot over the backs of their own men. And they're already shaken here. And the Witchram Inquisitors are probably just going to continue their advance, although having said that, it won't be too easy for them to chew their way through Knights of Innuminas. One-on-one, if both units are fully healthy, I'd suggest the Witchram Inquisitors should win that. But Eclipse turning his back on that engagement, probably wisely, cutting his losses and running. But yeah, there's a big amount of damage taken there by the Fornoster Rain Knights. That's also quite a lot of ammunition absorbed by the Witchram Inquisitors. So all things considered, not bad. Coldfell Maidens also getting onto the high ground over here, which could be very, very good for them indeed. If they get up here and start bombarding the Knights of Innuminas or the Dunedain Scouts, to be honest with you, that's going to be worthwhile. Although the Dunedain Scouts do see them coming, but it's not the easiest shot to make, to be honest with you. Coldfell Maidens, they don't have the thickest armour. They do wear that chainmail, but it's not the best, if I'm being honest. But the relative damage values that both units have, the Coldfell Maidens will certainly come out of this the better. And here you can see already some Arthedain cavalrymen starting to fall. And some of those will be Knights of Innuminas as well, which is definitely not what Dark Elven King would be wanting. I'm actually kind of surprised that he's trying to push forwards, because this is only going to encourage the Witchram Inquisitors to charge in, and with the support of those Coldfell Maidens, that you can see the Fornoster Rain Defenders are going to force the Coldfell Maidens to leave once again. But yeah, those Knights of Innuminas took a real beating at the hands of those Javelins, and now those Witchram Inquisitors should relatively easily win this fight. So very nice play from Eclipse there, using the terrain to his advantage. In conjunction with Tundra's Fox's Coldfell Maidens, very good teamwork there. And Dark Elven King is, you know, it's none of these engagements early on, which are just sort of skirmishing and losing small amounts of unit models, are never going to be truly decisive, but momentum is an important factor, and the blue team have started off well here. And again, considering, like I said, the cavalry is one aspect that the red team would really be hoping to impose upon the blue team here, considering the amount they've spent on it. To lose a large portion of a unit like Knights of Innuminas and Fornoster Rain Knights this early for not a huge amount of gain, to be honest with you, is not the best of starts, but definitely something that can be made up. Dunman Scouts running. What have we here? The Riders of the Broinen were trying to move forward and trying to impose their own ranged powers onto that cavalry. And of course, against wargs and against the more lightly armoured forces of the Rudar cavalry, these horse archers will be a difficult thing to try and deal with. As long as the micro is on point from the red team, they can definitely use units like this, the Grey Company, the Dunedain Scouts, and of course the Riders of the Golden Wood, to great effect, as long as they're able to get them into a good position to shoot. The Elven Horse Archers starting to fire. We're getting some good hits there on the Coldfell Maidens. Tundra's Fox needs to pick up the pace, because there you can see in only a couple of volleys, with their backs turned and their shields not really sort of pointing in the right direction, those elven arrows truly doing a hefty amount of damage. And interestingly enough, this is an interesting response to have over here. I mean, the Witchram Inquisitors were moving forward, but I wouldn't suggest wargs were the best thing to send into that particular meat grinder either. They do have hit points, but as soon as they're gone, they're very, very vulnerable to elven arrows. And you can see now with Arthedain starting to move forward, they have occupied this hill now, so they won't have to worry about similar events happening to them that happened before. Meanwhile, you can see here the first of the engagements between the footbound units are happening over on this side of the battlefield between Lothlorien and Mr. Sneakman's infantry contingent. The Marchwarns of the Wood starting to fire their poison arrows into the defensive position of Angmar up on the top of this hill. Guardians of Kharndoom at the front, but the Elven Archers are going to attempt to go after the Witchram Pikemen. Armour upgrade or no, the lack of a shield will be a problem against Elven arrows. But it's not the easiest shot, to be honest with you. Even for Elven Archers, with their very good accuracy, it does help to have a shot that's a little bit more makeable than this. Of course, you don't want to be wasting too much of your ammunition on a shot that's too difficult for an archer to make. Mr. Sneakman and the rest of his forces are also over here, but of course, Lothlorien will be hoping to use their archers to good effect in this sort of situation. Rudau are here in the middle with Rudau Swordsmen and Dunman Pikemen. Not the most heavy-duty front line, I have to say, especially considering that Imladris are probably going to be coming right up the pipe here. We're really going to have to hope that stuff like their javelins can do the business for them. Rudau marksmen firing away against units that are in range, apparently. So that's terrain advantage doing some good work for them. And considering that the Imladris pikes were the ones leading the way, once again, very good armour on these guys, but the lack of a shield, even against cheap archers like this, is not ideal. You really don't want to be giving cheap archers like the Rudau marksmen an excuse to be used cost effectively. What have we here? Dunedain scouts moving forward. Once again, they are not the most durable horse archer, but they are pretty damaging with their arrows. Shooting into the Angmar halberds there, which will be a very good target for them. Of course, low quality orc chain is all that protects them. And I don't really think there's anything in the way of archers over here, which, if Eclipse really didn't bring any archers whatsoever, that might be a bit of an oversight, to be honest with you. You always want something just so that you can at least contest. In this sort of situation, he's just having to sort of hang out. And you can see here the Dunedain scouts are now able to pick and choose their targets, and of course they will go after something a little bit more valuable like the Coldfell Maidens. After all, the defenders won't be too concerned if they lose a couple of Angmar halberdiers, but it's still a worthwhile target to go after, to be honest with you. Forward come the Dunman scouts to chase them off once again, but it's an easy enough task for the Dunedain scouts to get away, or at least it would be. Caught on their heels a little bit there, and Dunedain scouts will be able to get into melee with them a little bit at least. Not bad at all. Meanwhile, Windy's more infantry-heavy army moving forward, definitely more heavy duty in terms of the slower engagements on this field, which will be an important factor as the battle goes along, I think. Arthedain marksmen getting into position to try and return fire onto this sort of strong point for the defenders. I mean, this is definitely an area where they've bulked up quite a lot of their defences. There's a lot of swordsmen, a lot of archers, low tier spears, but also quite a few javelins concentrated around this area. So if the attackers can sort of force the defenders off this point, they may have the momentum they need to then push in and take this entire layer. Ooh, hello. Just in time to see a charge from the Loran-armed mounted company. So Lothlorien didn't commit any of their cavalry really over to the skirmishing over on the other side. And they are now able to charge in and get a good charge as well onto Guardians of Kharndoom and Snaga Stalkers, 2 units without any real defense against cavalry like that. I mean, Angmar won't be concerned about losing Snaga Stalkers, and they will be trying to use them as like an emergency buffer, but you don't want to be losing any units for nothing really, and the Snaga Stalkers will not be able to inflict any sort of damage on Loran Mounted Company, really, nothing worthwhile anyway. Units like the Gundabad Guard might be able to, though. Now Mr. Sneakman, who has got his cavalry returned over to this side of things, and I have to say as well, like, Imladris are over here, but for the most part, Lothlorien are a little bit more cut off from their allies here, mainly due to terrain and such, but Mr. Sneakman can sort of isolate Lothlorien here and just keep them bottled up, and maybe utilise his mounted units to go after factions like Imladris. Give his allies a little bit of assistance. What have we got going on over here? Gwythi Rockdoor charging in. An engagement between them and the Coldfell Maidens. I mean, obviously that's only going to go one way in terms of a melee fight, but close proximity to pikes, close proximity to other Rudauer skirmishers, including javelins, means the Gwythy Rockdor really don't want to hang around for too long, I would suggest. A lot of fighting going on all across the battlefield here. The Warg skirmishers trying to get into a position to bombard the Imladris infantry. Riders of the Goldenwood coming in, however, and with their Silverthorn arrows and their damage, they will be the last thing that the Warg skirmishers want to see in this particular situation. Mr. Sneakman definitely needs to be careful, because he's walking a fine line between using his cavalry exceptionally well or exceptionally poorly. If he gets them into certain positions here, both Imladris or Lothlorien could destroy them, but equally he could use those javelins to really good effect, and the Witcher Inquisitors are no pushover in melee either. Meanwhile, over on the other side of the battlefield, we're still seeing engagements out in the more open ground here. Dunedain Mounted Company facing off against Witcher Inquisitors. I'm actually surprised the Witcher Inquisitors were the ones pulling out of that fight, although the Knights of Numinous are coming in. But yeah, I would say that the Arthedain players over here have maybe struggled to establish their cavalry units in the way that they would like. I think Eclipse and Tundra's Fox over here have done a very good job at keeping the cavalry at arm's length, and there's a lot of open ground that it doesn't seem like either faction really wants to advance into over here, because obviously it will put them at the mercy of certain units. Coldfell Maiden's coming back now from Tundra's Fox as well. So you can see here that what Dark Elven King wants to do is to draw the cavalry forward so that his archers can support his now depleted cav line, but you know, I think you'll have to... It's going to be difficult to catch out the blue team like that now. Like, they've definitely got a game plan and they're going to stick to it. They're going to stick to the defensive ground over here, only coming forward when the units look a little bit more isolated. We also have some melee engagements happening over here. We can see the Imladris sentries moving forward with the support of the Imladris Guardians as well. Some of the strongest units of infantry available to Imladris. And of course, against units like Dunman Spearman, that's going to be an incredibly one-sided affair. But Ettenmore's Troll Hunters are over here, and that is going to be the name of the game for the blue team here. They are going to need to rely on drawing the enemy in and then using stuff like their javelins, because when it comes to just a pure strength in melee against the factions that are arrayed against them, they're not going to win. Even Angmar, who have their obviously a real strength there, they're not going to be able to defeat the quality of the factions that are arrayed against them here just through sheer brute strength. They're going to need to use a little bit more guile than that. Coldfell Maiden's getting into melee against the Imladris cavalry over here. The Imladris cavalry, though, needs to be careful. There are trolls on hand. Oof, dear. Not good for them. The Trolls of Angmar are the sort of thing which can be skewered quite easily from a chance from either of these Elder Runway units, though, to be honest with you. Shall see if that turns out to be the case, but yeah, again, for the most part, it is mostly cavalry engagement still, so skirmishing that's happening in between the two ranks of infantry thus far, and still Lothlorien holding their ground, not wanting to advance into this very narrow choke point and play into the very heavily defensive position that Angmar have taken up. But it may be that other sections of the battlefield yield the results they want. Certainly Inarius has decided to take matters into his own hands and move in. You can also see that the Arthedain marksman from Windy throwing, well, I say throwing, using those fire arrows to effect, trying to force Rudauer to break. Rudauer have got decent morale for an Evil Men faction, but definitely the sort of thing that can be used to their advantage. But between the Trollshaw axe throwers, which have probably used up their ammunition at this point, and the Ettenmore's Troll Hunters, you can see how quickly the tide of battle can turn, because now also with the addition of the Rudauer swordsmen in melee adding their numbers, the Imladris forces that were committed forward were a little bit isolated, a little bit easy to focus fire with their hand-thrown projectiles. Not ideal for them. The Noratirno warriors out of ammunition, though, by the looks of things, pulling out their dual weaponry, trying to reinforce their faltering front line. And to be fair, with the assistance of those arrows, that should be enough. The Noratirno warriors are good in melee, and it's not as if they're facing off against anything too special. Arthedain are also moving forward now as well, as the fire arrows continue. But I would say that Dark Elven King probably needs to think about being maybe a little bit more proactive. He's a little bit too far away from proceedings for my liking. At the very least, over here, Viper Action is at least facing off directly against Mr. Sneakman, and if need be, he can move forward quickly, whereas Dark Elven King is cowering a little bit, I think, on top of that hill, having taken those losses earlier on from his cavalry. He needs to be a little bit more supportive of his allies directly, I think. You can see here the Elder Runway Spearmen are filtering behind enemy lines now. I will give Inarius a lot of credit for being very aggressive, but aggression is going to be wasted if you get focused down by stuff like javelins as you push through. But I think the onus is also on Windy a little bit to also push forward, maybe into this choke point here. Stretch the blue team a little bit. Obviously the quality advantage certainly is for the red team, but you definitely want to not be bottling yourself up for stuff like the Rudar Javelins. The Attenmore's Troll Hunters have been caught out by the Eldraenway Spearmen though. Only 62 of them remaining, mind you, and you can see here that this front line now from Rudar is collapsing. When I say collapsing, they are actually just retreating back to a more advantageous position. Windy is pressurising this flank over here as well. Arthedain Man-at-Arms trying to make something happen, but they just took a pretty savage volley there from the Trollshaw Axe Throwers, and they are routing as a result. But at the very least, they'd rather be seeing the Trollshaw Axe Throwers use their ammunition on Arthedain Men-at-Arms than Imladris Guardians, I would suggest. This Rudar front line continuing to try and hold on. Nearby men routing. Another fresh unit of Arthedain Men-at-Arms is on station, however, to try and make something happen here. Riders of the Roinin also moving in, as well as some Dunedain Peacekeepers. And Windy's army is very infantry focused as well in comparison to his allies, so he can afford to take more losses like this. Moving forward, the Trollshaw Axe Throwers as well. Trying to get into another position to use their ammunition. Like the Trollshaw Axe Throwers, in spite of the fact that, you know, they're not the most expensive, and the fact that they are very fragile to missile fire, like they're coming under now, they always seem to get a lot of kills. Axe Throwers may have lost their AP, but that higher base damage really does help them. But from the front against Imladris and Arthedain, you know, AP would be very useful, to be honest with you, and maybe the damage isn't quite as effective as it would be. Obviously over there the Trollshaw Axe Throwers were hitting them in the back, which is fairly significant. Arthedain Marksman getting into position. Windy's army still largely sort of holding a fair amount back, but he is at least supporting Inarius' advance. Arthedain Pikemen also moving forward now as well. Rudar Axemen coming forward. Their AP, again, useful, but against Elven units like this, it often turns into they just don't have the melee defense to engage with the Elves for long enough to make those AP values really tell. And especially not now that they're getting support from the Arthedain Pikemen as well, because they're going to be more easily kept at arm's length. Rudar Swordsmen trying to filter in as well to help out. Foragem Javelins getting some good volleys here into the front of the Arthedain Pikemen. Forward comes some Elven Horsemen as well to try and get into a position to disrupt these Rudar firing lines, but the Rudar Swordsmen are sort of getting in the way. The Gwaithly Rockdoor are here, but they've taken losses getting through, and the Foragem Javelins, like, it's not going to be the best of charges. They're going to be able to get off here. And to be honest with you, in melee, considering how depleted the Gwaithly Rockdoor are, those big war clubs that the Foragem Javelins have are going to be more easily able to deal with them, especially now with the Franadine Nobles charging forward. So this is going to be largely the end of the Imladris cavalry force. Over here, meanwhile, all quiet on the western and eastern fronts. It's only in the middle where things have truly gotten underway. Lothlorien still not too keen on engaging over there, but to be honest with you, if I was Lothlorien, I would have a look at this defensive position and think, I can make something happen here. It's in loose formation. It's not really the most substantial front line either. And if Lothlorien really wants to be more proactive, they can make something happen over here, I think. And I think they do need to. Like, Imladris and Arthedain over here in the middle are doing stuff. Viper Action and Dark Elven King on the flanks are not really doing anything. Dark Elven King is also too far away to even quickly move forward and actually make something happen anyway. It looks like he is moving off the hill now. I mean, if I were on the red team, I'd definitely be telling him to get his arse in gear and not just sit on the hill and watch us die. Arthedain Marksmen firing their arrows directly upwards. Foragem Javelins now out of ammunition, but that might be a blessing in disguise for Rudar, because it does mean that their significant prowess in melee will be better used against the Arthedain and Imladris infantry. A lot of AP values, of course, for Rudar, and the Foragem Javelins are no different in melee. Multiple HP as well, albeit maybe not the most durable units in melee. Similar story to the Black Wolves, really. A Berserker unit where once their hit points are gone, their woeful defensive values are exposed. No armour, very limited skill, but while those hit points are in effect, they can do a lot of AP damage. More Imladris forces moving forward. Another unit of Eldraenway Spearmen, so the quality just keeps coming forward from Imladris, supported as they are by a few units from Arthedain. It has taken quite a lot of the blue team's effort to just try and stop this advance, and they won't be able to stop it for much longer either. There's so much on this front line at this point that they see the opportunity to continue pushing forward. Concentration of force, as it may be. Coldfell Maidens throwing their javelins in, Elder Runaway Swordmasters. I mean, this is the downside to this sort of thing. As they push forward and as they get caught up on these individual pockets of resistance, this gives the units like the Troll Shiraxtras and Etenmor's Troll Hunters the opportunity they need to inflict the damage on, particularly Imladris, that they need to do. I feel as though Rudar have what it takes to face Arthedain in melee, because Arthedain are more reliant on their armour than Imladris are, but Imladris have got such quality in melee that Rudar will kind of struggle. But between that and the charges coming in here from the Granadine Nobles, it could be difficult for Imladris to keep this level of assault up. Meanwhile, over here, Lothlorien have now moved forward. Maybe seeing the fact that Mr. Sneakman is sort of hanging out. Karos Galadhon's Guardians, Galathran Blade Masters in there, Lorinarn's Sword Masters. There's a lot of quality on the front line here, and to be honest with you, the Karos Galadhon's Guardians mean that unless Angmar have got some sort of ranged support, this front line is going to fall. And to be honest with you, the ranged support is coming from Lothlorien. The Elder Council able to force a retreat there from the Orc fellas. But yeah, this front line from Angmar is not going to last too much longer, I don't think. I mean, usually Angmar can rely on having a pretty stable front line with their Witch Realm Pikemen, especially armour upgraded as they are, but the Karos Galadhon's Guardians are a whole nother matter. Like, you could try and send the Trolls in, but to be honest with you, with the close proximity of all of the two-handed Elven Swordsmen, Trolls probably aren't the answer there, to be honest with you. You can see Lothlorien are actually now moving for a concentration of force over here, which means maybe Mr. Sneakman can use these forces elsewhere. Meanwhile, Dark Elven King now moving forward, and he needs to move forward, I think, to be honest with you. Now that Viper Action is having success, that, you know, the attack in the middle is kind of stalling because of all the Rudar javelins, but I do think that the red team needs to attack all across the field, to be honest with you, and he is forming up his forces at the very least, but interestingly enough, Eclipse is actually moving to meet him, and that may be as a result of the fact that he doesn't really have archers, so he is going to meet them on even ground, because obviously if he just keeps his position on the high ground, Arthedain will just shoot him. Where are those witches, I wonder? That green fire can melt quite a lot of this snow. And Dark Elven King, I feel as though, is probably going to be the one that's on the receiving end of that particular unit. We shall see. Meanwhile, over here in the middle, obviously, just continuing to try and push forward. I mean, I am interested to see if Imladris, with their Arthedain support, can keep this up. With their quality, you would think that they would be able to, but it's just a matter of if they can absorb all the casualties they're inevitably taking from the Rudar skirmishers, obviously the javelins in particular, but even the Rudar archers are going to be able to pick and choose their targets here. Etenmor's Troll Hunters routing and broken. Granadine Nobles charging into the Arthedain marksmen there, but they need to get out of there quickly before the Fornost Terrain defenders get there, and they're not really able to do that, so those Arthedain spears able to kill off a lot of those Rudar knights. Very, very good news for them. Of course, the other side of the coin is, do Rudar have the ammunition to keep inflicting damage in the way that they're doing on Imladris, and do they have the infantry strength to continue feeding into Imladris to slow them down? I'm not so sure. These Etenmor's Troll Hunters are completely cut off at this point, sandwiched between the forces of Arthedain and Imladris. I have to say, I think Inarius and Windy in the middle here have probably done the best of all the red team armies at the moment. Meanwhile, over here at the very least, Eclipse probably has exactly the engagement he wants. Now that Dark Elven King has moved forward, he's very quickly taken the initiative and moved forward himself. And this is where Angmar are a little bit more at home. Obviously, if they're being capped at arm's length in an archer-focused engagement, it's not ideal for them. Witch Realm Inquisitors charging in here, getting some damage done on the Arthedain marks. And obviously, it's not all sunshine and rainbows for him, because he is having to deal with the Evendim archers and Grey Company offering fire support from the hill. The Grey Company in particular, with the body-piercing projectiles, that's going to be an issue. Dismounted Fornost Terrain Knights, I mean, to be fair, one of the better units Arthedain have for dealing with trolls, to be honest with you, but the trolls, in addition to all these Angmar forces over here, and this is where Angmar are at their best, I would have to say, crunching forward, just sort of buckling the sides of enemy lines and doing their damage that way. It's just a case of whether Eclipse can do that quickly enough that he doesn't take too much damage from the archer support up on this hill from Dark Elven King. But this is something I think that the red team, or the blue team I say, sorely needs, because I think they are losing the engagements everywhere else on the field. I mean, certainly Lothlorien are going to win over here. I don't think there's really any salvaging this for Mr. Sneakman at this point. I think he was maybe he got a little bit too comfortable with Lothlorien, to be fair, and I was wondering if Viper Action was going to be passive the whole battle, but he wasn't. And that has been to his team's great benefit, because now Lothlorien are certainly going to win against Angmar over on this side. And best of all, they're going to win without having used a huge amount of their range support. Although having said that, Mr. Sneakman is also being proactive. Like, this flanking assault I think is doomed to failure, but at the very least it's making it so Lothlorien is going to have to use some of their ammunition. And it's better than just doing nothing with these units, I have to say. Sometimes you have to break a few eggs. Meanwhile, Windy is coming in over here, and he is going to be able to flank around the back of this defensive position over here. Once again, Rudar are just having to sort of rely on their infantry holding on for as long as they possibly can. And units like their Coldfell Maidens, their Archers, having to go in here. A good flanking move, I have to say, from all these Fornoster Rain defenders. Like, he had them in reserve for just the right time. Arthedain Men-at-Arms and Fornoster Rain defenders are not the most damaging unit. Fornoster Rain Knights are, though. So a good sort of mix of numbers and quality that Arthedain have flanking around here, and you can see now that Rudar are really losing stomach for the fight. They've been fighting off against a lot of quality from Arthedain and Imladris for some time, to be fair, and at this point it does look as though they're starting to come unstuck. Dismounted Knights of Annuminous over here as well. To be fair, Grenadine Pikemen holding their arm's length, but not ideal from them either. Rudar Swordsman and some Trolls over here trying to make something happen, but still Windy has had a lot of infantry reserves he could commit, and that's largely as a result of the kind of army he chose to bring. Like, they were able to just keep feeding men and manpower in over here because he didn't really bring too much in the way of archers or cavalry, and that ended up being a good thing. Him and Imladris definitely worked together very well. Dark Elven King, meanwhile, has had significantly less luck over here. It's been exactly the sort of fight that Angmar has wanted over here. He's really, Arthedain had to move forward at some point. He couldn't just stay up on this hill. And when he did, Angmar seized the initiative and engaged in the kind of warfare that Angmar liked best. A quick, brutal and bloody engagement. Casualties on both sides, but it's the casualties that Angmar can absorb with their infantry and with their composition and the way they set out. Arthedain simply couldn't. Dark Elven King has managed to sort of have some of his units return from routing, but his fate is largely sealed. But I'm not sure whether Eclipse has got the numbers left that would be necessary to win the battle elsewhere. I mean, certainly over here, Mr. Sneakman's army is continuing to be rolled over by the sheer quality. Guardians of Khan Doom, Orcfellas. Victory seems certain for them, in conjunction with the Gundabad Guard. Killing off the Elder Council, which is a decent thing for them. I mean, to be fair, that's a fair amount of orcs over here that have not really been accounted for Viper Action. Maybe getting a little bit greedy and trying to take the top of the hill and not leaving behind enough to actually deal with this sort of thing. Kindred of Celeborn, though, will easily be able to defeat these somewhat depleted Guardians of Khan Doom in melee. There's also some Loran-armed archers in there as well, which of course heavy elven archers, more than capable of looking after themselves in melee. More range support from Marchwardens of the Wood, but Mr. Sneakman has managed to give a silver lining to his cloud here, because obviously he is going to lose against Lothlorien, but he's made it more costly for Lothlorien than it initially looked like it was going to be. Meanwhile, here in the middle, Windy and Inarius continuing to push forward. Just a single unit of Rudar Swordsmen over here, as well as some Dunman Pikemen, having to go up against, once again, the quality that Arthedain and Imladris have brought to the field today. Moving around the back once again with the Gwythi Arthand, Arthedain Pikemen getting into place. Still some Annuminous Gate Guards back there as well, so they have managed to sort of salvage a lot of their units over here, though, it is worth saying. Like, just having a look at the mini-map over here, as soon as it lets me double-click on an area, you can see that they have managed to retreat over here, and now they're going to have to try and use some of these really nice defensive positions at the back to their advantage here, but I'm not sure whether Rudar have enough, necessarily, to do that. You can see over here the Rudar Marksmen taking some real damage there from the Dunedain Rangers, the body piercing. Windy seeing that they're in densely packed formations, and so it's worth his time to make sure that Rudar are not able to really do any damage from up on these cliffs with some of these cheap and cheerful archers. Meanwhile, can see over here that, for the most part, I have to say, this Arthedain army has been dealt with. Having said that, Dunedain Troll Slayers, I think now you can see that Eclipse, he's largely dealt with this army over here. He's made his point, and so at this point he's just going to have to retreat what he has left. Because I mean, it's not as if he didn't take any casualties dealing with Arthedain over here in the way that he did, but he is going to need to retreat now, otherwise he will find himself surrounded and isolated from his allies. So he is going to need to retreat back to the final stand, and we shall see if they are going to be able to deal with that. Riders of the Golden Wood forcing the Witch Realm Inquisitors away. Numbers being what they are, the Riders of the Golden Wood will feel quite confident. Still some forces down here. Still some Gundabad Guard. Still some Guardians of Khan Doom. Obviously they are doomed, but at the very least they're going down fighting and making it so Lothlorien are going to be delayed from linking up with their allies. This battle over here has been a bit isolated from what's been going on in the rest of the field, certainly. The middle engagement and the engagement over on the far side have been a little bit more linked together, whereas Lothlorien and Angmar over on this side have been having much more of a 1v1 for the most part. Angmar very quickly sort of sent over their mounted units to try and help against Imladris, but that was very short-lived. Keren Amroth Rangers, another very dangerous unit to have in the late game if they have ammunition. The additional damage that Elven Rangers tend to have, of course. Gundabad Guard, not the easiest unit to get rid of, it must be said. Heavier Orc Spearman. But going up against the quality that these Elven units have, certainly easier said than done to kill them off. I do like the fact that the Gundabad Guard sort of have stolen Dwarven gear, like Dwarven shields and helmets. Don't know how that guy managed to kill off a Dragon Slayer of Ered Mithrin, but according to his gear, he somehow managed to do it. Marchwardens of the Wood able to shoot from on high here, maybe trying to end this battle even more quickly with those poison arrows. Obviously that morale debuff should be enough to send these Orc forces routing. Guardians of Khan Doom do, as do the Gundabad Guard. And that's going to be the end of Mr. Sneakman's resistance over here, which will of course mean that Lothlorien can continue to push forward. I mean, he does have a few units that are still running away, trying to retreat back to the final stand. I'm not sure whether these Angmar Halberdiers will make it necessarily, but maybe. Trying to go right round the houses over here, which is an issue obviously. You know, it's not a map that has a truly convenient spot, I think, for a last stand, because you can always flank right the way around and have to defend multiple angles, but this might be the best place to do it because obviously there's a few more pathways that you can use. Make the engagement narrow, which I think is probably the only chance that the blue team stand at this point. I mean, it is possible that Coldfell Maiden's charging in. It is possible that as we see the battle wear on, maybe Imladris and Arthedain in the middle committed too much, but I think Arthedain, particularly Windy's army, was able to absorb more casualties because of the amount of infantry he bought, so that's not something I would necessarily rely upon. Coldfell Maiden's routing very quickly in the face of a lot of human and elven spearman. Arthedain marksmen continuing to fire. Granadine nobles still buzzing around. I mean, even 12 knights can be a fairly significant factor. This is all that remains of Dark Elven King's army, so you know, they did win over on one side at the very least, the defenders in this situation. But, I mean, they still have Wardens of the North over here, so even Dark Elven King, with his army being as brutalised as it is, he should still be able to impact the battle with some armour-piercing arrows. The question remains, how do the red team now approach this battle? Rudar marksmen, only 26 of them up on this hill, but they're still able to poke and prod at the enemy as they move through their territory. Any kills they can get at this point will be a real boon. They're going to need to try and make up some of their losses here, the defenders. And it's certainly Windy here who has the vast majority of his units left. Like Imladris, it cost them quite dearly, I think, to move through the centre as they did. I mean, they definitely made the gains that their team needed them to. But I mean, this is pretty much all that remains of their army as a result. Like those Rudauer javelins and axeloads definitely did a number on them. But having said that, it's not as if they're going to be completely without elven quality, because Lothlorien had a much better time of it over here against Angmar. And so they still have that aspect of their army left. Lothlorien certainly, I think, actually of all of the red team's armies is the one in best condition. Windy, after all, did not escape going through that meat grinder in the middle completely unscathed. Coldfell Maidens once again trying to charge in, but again it's spears. They're unlikely to do much in the way of damage, significant damage against them with their charge reflection. It's definitely a match that's on a knife edge. I mean, having a look at the percentage of kills, the blue team are behind by 5%, but 5% is not insurmountable. If that was sort of over 10, I would suggest that maybe the battle was over, especially considering Lothlorien are still in pretty decent shape. But 5% is doable, especially considering some of the units they still have left. Like, they do still have a completely healthy unit of Franadine Berserkers, with their projectile and then with their abilities in melee. They still have Witch Realm Enslavers, which are a really savage unit to have in the late game, especially against what Windy has left. Dunman Spearmen and Franadine Pikemen, also Rudar Swordsman, Witch Realm Pikemen as well. I mean, there's Blackwatch Legion. At this late stage, I'm not really sure what a mass push would really give the defenders. They still have some Trolls, as well as some Witch Realm Blackguard. They still have units of quality here. It's whether they have enough that I'm slightly concerned about. Those Angmar Halberdiers are still trying to get away. Witch Realm Inquisitors are here. You can see here Elder Council are moving, and the Orcs at this point are very tired. The Elves should be more than sufficient to catch up with them, especially with the Riders of the Goldenwood here. I wouldn't necessarily charge Riders of the Goldenwood into these Halberdiers, because the Halberdiers could turn around and make that more costly than it needs to be, and these Halberds are not exactly a key stone in the defenders' plans. Maybe they will be, though. Maybe I'll eat those words. Maybe it will turn out that this unit of Angmar Halberds is the difference between victory and defeat, but it certainly won't be if they get routed by the Elves that are chasing them, to be honest. And at this point, it might just be worth their while to get the Angmar Halberds into phalanx and turn them around so they at least kill off a couple of units before they inevitably rout. They're now exhausted as well. Some Gundabad Guard trying to scramble back as well. Mr. Sneakman trying to save at least something for the final stand to help out his allies. What have we over here? The Royal Court of House Armlaith moving in, going up against depleted Franadine Nobles and Coldfell Maidens. Interesting fight, actually, considering the numbers. I have to say, the AP from the Franadine Nobles is not something the Royal Court of House Armlaith would normally want to be getting involved with, but based on the numbers advantage, probably worth their while, to be honest with you. Dark Elven King still trying to affect the battle. Meanwhile, Riders of the Goldenwood are over here. Yeah, the Angmar Halberds are routing at this point. Not too surprising. Will the Gundabad Guard make it? Probably not, with Inarius and Windy and the full might of their army moving through here. I'd be very surprised if they did. They're also exhausted. That heavy armour not feeling quite such an advantage now, I would assume. Riders of the Goldenwood. So Lothlorien now beginning the process of linking up with their allies, and that's going to be enough to rout them as well. So Mr. Sneakman truly wasn't able to save anything, really, which is probably to be expected considering the situation he was in. Franadine Nobles facing off against the Royal Court of House Armlaith. Forward come the Evendim Archers and the Wardens of the North, cycling around over here. Again, it's not the most substantial flanking force, but it's something at the very least, and I'm sure at this point the forces of evil are feeling a little bit bottled up. The noose is tightening. And like I said, this map doesn't really offer like a truly out-and-out defensive last stand position. This is very makeshift. It's still quite open, to be honest with you, which the red team should be able to use to their advantage as the elves start to move forward. Although I would say they don't really need to worry about guarding this side anymore. Like, all of the red team are actually coming from this angle, which does mean that they have even terrain, but it does mean they're only attacking from one side as well, which might be the difference. Maybe that's the break that the blue team needed. Let's not forget the witches are probably around here somewhere as well. I can't imagine they were utilised earlier on. I've lost track of them, which is a big no-no when you're talking about the witches. Guardians of Khandu, Rudar Swordsman. I mean, the Blackwatch Legion at the very least should be able to hold a line pretty well. The witches have got to be around here somewhere. That's the Witch Realm Enslavers, depleted. Maybe they were killed earlier on. If so, then it probably cost Eclipse a little bit too much to push forward into Dark Elven King, and in spite of Dark Elven King technically losing the engagement, it would turn out to be worthwhile if the Witches were killed. No, there they are. Although that is a very bizarre decision from Eclipse to do that. He charged them into Riders of the Golden Wood. Seems very strange. And the Trolls are here now. But he needs to get these Witches out because they're probably the best chance for victory. I mean, the Franadine Rangers and the Trolls are going to stop the Witches from being slain by Lothlorien as they move forward at the very least. But, yes, very weird. I think Eclipse is quite fortunate that mistake wasn't punished a little bit more earnestly. Regardless. What have we over here? Franadine Berserkers and Ferodrim Javelins moving across now. Avendim Archers are moving in. Dark Elven King trying to put some pressure over on this side, but to be honest with you, I think he's maybe sprung what little strength he has a little bit early, because it means that, you know, the units that were already over here are going to easily be able to focus down units like Avendim Archers in melee. But still, aggression is always something to be admired, even when it's misplaced. Yeah, they're going to rout very, very quickly. Ah, there go the Witchers. Maybe not the most devastating volley, but at the very least they're going to be doing some damage here. Putting a dent in that unit of Arthedain Pikemen. Forward come the Enuminous Gate Guards. Of course, with their morale buffing capabilities, Arthedain are very unlikely to rout. Though Witcher Fire does tend to have a rather catastrophic effect on an army's morale. Gwaith the Arthan, so Imladris moving over here. Kill the wicked things. Yeah, Trolls of Angmar are pretty wicked. With those shards of metal that they've affixed to their arms. Royal Court of House Armley, so they and the Rise of the Golden were trying to swing out wide, maybe trying to be forgotten about, and then swinging in to get some nice hammer and anvil strikes on this. Obviously it's going to be quite difficult to cover every angle. The Wardens of the North firing in now to the Angmar Halberds, but again, it'll be interesting. Just from a quality perspective though, units like Angmar Halberds make me fear the worst for the blue team, because they're already behind in terms of percentages and they're having to rely on units like Angmar Halberds to bulk out their army. Worrying to say the least. Those Trolls of Angmar are also being overwhelmed by Imladris forces over here. There goes a general. I would assume that's an Angmar general. Witcher-Armed Blackguard moving in here. Loren-Armed Axemen routing off, as well as Arthedain Pikemen. So a combination of the Witcher Fire, the Ferodrim Javelins and Franadine Berserkers in close proximity, and the fear-causing effect of the Witcher-Armed Blackguard is causing these Arthedain units to rout off. In come the Dismounted Knights of Numinous. I feel as though, you know, they need to attack all at once here. The red team, they're in danger of squandering the advantage they worked so hard to build. Attacking all at once may be risky because of the Witchers and because of all of the sort of javelins and the like, but they chose to attack mostly from this one direction. They chose to bottle themselves up. It doesn't change the fact that they need to be aggressive and try and smash the depleted defenders down now. Because in terms of melee power, they simply don't have what it takes to stand up to what they have left from Lothlorien and the like. You can see over here the Guardians of Khan Doom. I mean, this is an ideal example of that. There's still Elder Enway fighting. They're having to go up against armour-clad Dunedain. The Guardians of Khan Doom are pretty decent defensively, but offensively that's where they come unstuck a little bit. And so it is turning out to be here. White the Arthand fighting hard over here. They're a little bit more isolated, to be fair. The Black Wolves will be able to inflict some casualties on them, but if there's one thing the Gwaith the Arthand are good at, it's staying alive under extreme pressure. And that may be what happens over here. Over here, meanwhile, some Dunedain Troll Slayers using some javelins there against these Rudar forces. Franadine Berserkers turning back round. The Avendim Archers are, of course, routing at this point. Royal Court of House Armlaith are gone as well. That was an unfortunate use of them. They must have charged into the pikemen or something. Lothlorien keeping some of their units in reserve. Guardians of Khan Doom starting to rout off. The Black Wolves will now start to come under more extreme pressure. Dunedain Peacekeepers moving forwards. Blackwatch Legion still fighting hard on the front line. More Angmar forces arriving to try and reinforce against the strength that the attackers are bringing to the field. Rudar Swordsman, you can see there the split shot starting to be employed by the Kindred of Caliban and the Karen Amroth Rangers. We're also doing the same. Dismounted Knights of Illuminus, the telltale green embers that the Witchers leave behind. There goes one of the Arthedain generals at the hands of the Rudar Swordsman. Not a bad performance from them at all. Arthedain marksmen on the verge of routing. Witchround Blackguard reforming with the Guardians of Kharn-Dûm. You can see there goes another general. Couldn't really tell because it was in the trees, but you can see here that Arthedain is starting to crumble here under the pressure from this side. Now, those elven units are just sort of stood there waiting and watching as their army in front of them starts to rout off, to be honest with you. Windy and Inarius, with what he had left, are being as aggressive as they have been throughout the entire fight. There are units back here, though, which I feel as though, you know, again, Lorinand Archers getting into position to shoot down the line, which is good. Again, there's sort of the green embers of the Witchers, although it's only individual patches, which suggests to me there's only one left, and undoubtedly the elves are going to be trying to focus down those Witchers. So the Witchers actually haven't been all that decisive, to be honest with you. The damage that they've done has been fairly minimal based on what we've seen. Poison arrows now being loose from Lothlorien. Lothlorien definitely getting their archers into good positions here, which is very bad news, I would have to say, for the defenders. Especially with those poison arrows, honestly, because, you know, those morale shocks could be the final nail in the coffin. Karen Amroth Rangers starting to charge in now as well. The final blob of orcs, really, trying to put up some resistance. Blackwold's getting shot, which is the last thing they want, and they're also going to be held in place by more advancing Arthedain pikemen. Some of them there have got their chainmail faces. Truly the most scary abominations in the game. Over here, still fighting going on over here, actually, by the looks of things, and Dark Elven King is still alive. Very depleted Wardens of the North and Dunedain Trollslayers, but as expected, like, I feel as though the defenders didn't send enough over here to try and deal with this threat initially, and it was kind of reactionary when they did send across a lot. There's still Witch Realm Enslavers over here, but they're being shot by split shot arrows, and I don't feel as though one unit of them is going to be enough to turn around the fortunes of the defenders on this occasion. I could be wrong there. Individual units have surprised me before, but I think in this case it's a little bit too much of a gap for them to make up. I mean, the Ferocium Javelins are here as well, but it's not the easiest fight for them against the dismounted Fornost Array Knights. They will win, but it won't be easy enough for them to continue any sort of momentum. Blackwolds are over here, I mean, maybe. Still Rudar Swordsman. Again, Dismounted Knights of Illuminus fighting hard, obviously a very, very solid unit, very difficult to kill. Rip. More poison arrows finding their marks, which you can see here, a lot of these Angmar forces that are here in this mosh pit that Lothlorien have set up for them. Karas Galadhon's Guardians as well, even only 22 of them here in the late game could be enough to make the difference. Yeah, there's a lot of routing going on now. The Witch Realm Blackguard will stand and fight to the bitter end, but the Witch Realm units, despite having decent morale for orcs, under all this pressure, especially considering the quality Lothlorien still have with the Watchers of the Goldenwood, the Kindred of Caliban, are still back there as well, waiting to be committed to melee. Another 25 of the finest Lothlorien have to offer. Things are looking bleak for Angmar and Rudar. The Witch King might be losing yet another of his holdouts. Oof, and those split shot arrows. Again, in terms of functionality, they're probably not actually as useful as the body piercing that Rangers offer, but they're still very good at what they do, to be fair. And obviously they have that X factor of launching several arrows downrange. Oof. Hunted down by the Blackballs. Looks like he was trying to run away and then was viciously clawed back, but there you can see the Witch Realm units are starting to rout at this point. Franadine Berserkers trying to make their way around the top of the map, but again, I don't think 39 of them is going to be enough to make the difference at this stage. Franadine Pikemen. A strong unit to be sure, but again, very depleted. It's been a bold last stand here from the Forces of Evil, but a last stand it will be, I believe. I think Lothlorien just had a little bit too much left following their fight with Mr. Sneakman's Angmar army. It was always going to be a difficult task to come back, and I feel as though Imladris and Arthedain in the middle deserve quite a lot of credit for being as aggressive as they were, considering the dicey situation that it was with Rudauer's javelins and axe throwers. If you're going to be aggressive like that, you need to commit. It's no good being sort of half or 3/4 aggressive, because then Rudauer's javelins and axe throwers would have been enough to stop that push. As it was, though, they went all in. Rudauer's front lines weren't able to hold for long enough for Rudauer's javelins and axe throwers to maybe do the damage that they could have done, and that was another decisive moment. Eclipse did very well against Dark Elven King, but ultimately that was never going to be enough to make up for the losses that the evil forces suffered on the other side of the battle. But again, it's small margins in this battle. Like, again, you just have to look close, very close, considering the numbers that are still left on the field. Not a lot, but in the end, a good performance from everyone involved, really. In come the Elven Pikes. They're going to try and finally finish off the Witch Realm Enslavers, who are probably going to be the last ones standing. There goes a Rudauer General. Watchers of the Golden Wood. Another very, very strong unit. They haven't taken many losses at all, considering the amount of time they've been in melee. It goes to show that having good armor values in conjunction with really high melee defense, like some of these really high tier Elven units have, can make them so difficult to break down. And they haven't even taken many losses against a unit like Pranodyne Berserkers, which are well known for their killing power. Karen Amroth Rangers taking a little bit of friendly fire there from their Kindred of Caliborn brethren. That's going to be the end of the Pranodyne Berserkers, which does mean that this is going to be the final holdout of action here on the battlefield today. Some Witch Realm Enslavers using those big tridents. Very fine unit of AP bodyguard tier shock infantry, but there's a time and a place for them, and unfortunately they didn't really have the survivability that was needed here in the late game. Oh, there's that crazy death animation where the unit model goes crazy and then T-poses into the floor and goes 2D. But yeah, a well-earned victory, I think, here by the attackers, because they played it very well. I think particularly Inarius and Windy deserve a lot of credit for how aggressive they were in the middle, despite that looking like a dicey situation. I did say as well that if they could take that middle position that Rudauer had taken up, if they could force that back, the momentum could be enough to carry them to victory, and that did turn out to be the case, because Rudauer put a lot into defending that, and the red team was able to push them back regardless. So a very good performance, I think, from the attackers in general. But yeah, I think in particular Windy and Inarius deserve a lot of credit for what they were able to accomplish in the battle. Lothlorien got the most kills, but again, I feel as though the momentum they had against Mr. Sneakman was all well and good, but they also managed to preserve enough of their manpower in the late game to make sure that there was no way back into it for the defenders. Good performances by the defenders, to be honest with you, though. I think Mr. Sneakman was dealt quite a rough hand going up against Lothlorien in the way that he did. Eclipse did very well against Dark Elven King, considering he had no real ranged presence. He waited for them to move forward, which they had to. They couldn't camp on that hill forever. And then he very quickly moved in and was decisive, which is good to see. Tundra's Fox did a lot of damage with his javelins and axe throwers. In the end, though, it wasn't enough. Considering the amount of damage he must have done to Imladris, for it still not to be enough, I think actually owes quite a lot to the composition that Windy decided to bring in this situation. I think his army complemented Imladris's ideally and was exactly what his team needed, because it's not all of his allies really invested at least a decent amount into cavalry. If he had done that as well, they may not have had the infantry to actually pull this off. But he decided to go very heavily into Arthedain's infantry, which, when it comes to stuff like Fornoster Rain Defenders and Arthedain Men-at-Arms, they're not spectacular, but they're very functional, especially when you have all the armour upgrades. They can be quite difficult to break down. But also he went for quite a lot of the higher tier infantry as well. Dismounted Knights of Numinous, of course, Fornoster Rain Knights, Dunedain Peacekeepers, all good stuff, which was a big contributing factor. But Inarius as well was very aggressive. He ended up not getting as much kills as either Windy or Viper as a result, which for Imladris you might think is a bit odd, but he did sort of take it upon himself to be the aggressor, which is always a very admirable thing indeed. But let's see what did the damage for Angmar. The Witch is obviously having a relatively poor performance, but as late on as they were used, it was always going to be quite easy for Lothlorien to see them and shoot them. And obviously Lothlorien with their archers are going to be making very quick work of units like Witchers. Witch Realm Inquisitors did very well, to be fair. Like early on, I do feel as though Eclipse was probably the best performer of the defenders. With Tundra's Fox, to be fair, like the two of them had some very good interplay. Especially early on with the Inquisitors, the Coldfell Maidens and the like, able to really deplete Dark Elven King's cavalry force and maybe make it so that the blue team wasn't able to claim the mounted advantage in the way that they maybe would have liked, considering their compositions. Blackwatch Legion did quite well late on. Guardians of Kharn doing much the same. Angmar Hellbirds getting 165 kills. That's not bad considering the level of forces they were going up against, probably mostly against Arthur Dane's more standard units, to be fair. And the Witch Realm Pikemen also doing very well, so a good holding unit. The rest of the infantry having a decent time of it. Witch Realm Blackguard, again, they were used so late on that they were going up against stuff like Watchers of the Golden Wood and Dismounted Knights of Annuminus, which is always going to be difficult things to get a lot of kills on. And then Mr. Sneakman, he got the fewest kills of all the defenders, but again, he was up against Lothlorien primarily, so that's why a lot of these units didn't get too many kills. But quite an impressive performance from the Orc fellas. His MVP, the only unit to break 100 kills for him was a unit of Cheap Axemen, which against Lothlorien is not a bad performance at all. But yeah, like he was in a pretty difficult situation. I feel as though, again, he didn't really have any sort of archers, which I think is a bit of a mistake. If you're going to put yourself in a defensive position like that against Lothlorien, you need archers or javelins or something at least to just sort of make it so that you're not having to go up against both the quality of Lothlorien in melee, which he was really struggling with, obviously, like the pikes, the Karas Gladhon's Guardians, combined with the Lorenan Swordmasters and Axemen, made mincemeat of his normally quite stable and strong Angmar front line. Yeah, but he needed some javelins or some archers to at least contest that. He still probably would have lost, but at least it wouldn't have been. He would have been able to inflict a few more casualties on Lothlorien, which could ultimately have made the difference, because it was Lothlorien having such strength in the late game, which put this kind of beyond the reach of the defenders late on, to be honest with you, in spite of their spirited last stand. But yeah, this was a very enjoyable match actually. It was close. It was on a map which is very interesting. It was cinematic as well. Obviously, nice Angmar Rudauer alliance, a classic one, and then obviously the elves and the Dunedain marching together to take yet another stronghold of the Witch King and his devoted followers. Nice good versus evil battle, which I know people always like. So yeah, big thank you to everyone involved. Big thank you to Eclipse for sending this one to me. Eclipse always tends to send me some really high quality stuff, which I'm pleased about. Now that the new year is in, I really want to get involved in more of this, to be honest with you. But again, like recording as I do and trying to keep up the schedule as I do, it kind of saps my will to actually play the game myself quite a lot of the time, considering my more limited amount of free time. But I should have a little bit more free time. Like I'm mostly done. I've mostly managed to do my assignments before Christmas, to be honest with you, and now all the Christmas stuff is out of the way. Maybe I can start to get involved a little bit more both in this and in Silmarillion Total War. At least that's the hope. I mean, things can change pretty quickly in January with university assignments and stuff, and my free time might end up being much lower than I would expect, but we shall see. I do hope as well that I didn't steal this one out from Underwindy, but Eclipse did send it to me. So again, like I said, when I get sent stuff, I will use it. Yeah. Anyway, regardless of that, I think everyone played very well. Big thank you to Eclipse for sending this one to me. Next up will probably be another Reforged replay, to be honest. I'm not sure which one yet. I do sort of constantly have a decent store of Reforged replays that I can pick from, although I'm always willing to take more, of course. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.